Far too often we are left to criticise what this government says as against what it then goes and does. And many people ask, well, what am I going to do about it? Well, there's nothing specific that I can do to change certain things, but I can do these videos and help you to understand law and how all these things apply, so that when it comes around to voting, you'll at least be a little bit better informed. I hope, at least. So what am I talking about? Well, back to council tax. Now, you'll remember Keir Starmer again and again saying not a penny more on your council tax, and you can rip up the bills and you won't be paying any more, etc., etc. And you'll have heard the stories or read the stories all over the country about bins not being collected, there's rubbish strewn down the streets, there's rat-infested areas in some places, and to top it all, in the northeast, council tax has now a record £444 more than some of those living in London. And there's a lot to talk about in this video, but this and jobs and also what you can say online that might land you in prison, and I'll come back to that in the second half of the video, because again, what can I do about it? Well, I can help you to understand the law and help you to understand what to do and not do, and what defense you might have if you've published something and you get a knock at the door saying that they're going to prosecute you. And that can actually have some devastating consequences to your life. So that's what I can do here. I can help you to understand these things. And for that, please do subscribe to my channel here, because I will continue plugging away and talking about these things and help you to understand. But about half of you don't subscribe. And that is the one thing I do ask. I know I ask again and again. Forgive me, those of you that have subscribed. The other half haven't. Give them a nudge and please subscribe. Thank you very much. So this is, it's a staggering statistic, £440 more in the northeast than some of those living in London. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Now, everybody understands that people living in London get a subsidy for London. You get a salary, you get a subsidy for London. You get expenses and travel, you get a subsidy for London because London's more expensive. But here, as GB News says, the stark difference between the areas become more dramatic over the years and finally reach record levels. And this survey analysis by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. Bills rise by an average of 5% across England and Wales. Now, the 5% obviously comes from that being the cap. Usually, the 5% is the cap, and they need permission to raise it beyond that. And so many of them now have raised it above that, but it's now just getting absolutely ridiculous. Some of them paying thousands of pounds more every year. What can you do about that? Well, all you can really do on an ongoing day-to-day basis is raise the complaints with your council if bins are not collected and things like that. Raise complaints with your MP, make these things known, make your voices heard, and you have to get these things across so that hopefully we get a system that fixes all these problems and not just passes on these costs and actually reduces and cuts the services in the process. But it's not only that. We've got contradictory statements as well. We have Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer saying there's going to be an increase in jobs, more people going to get jobs and all of this sort of stuff, and more people into work, more people being paid more. But at the same time, Rachel Reeves is quoted to have told Sky News in an interview, quote, "I'm confident that we can reduce civil servant numbers by 10,000. So she wants to cut 10,000 jobs. Now, obviously, there's a double-edged sword here. She wants to cut spending and costs on the one hand, but that goes against the narrative, does it not, that they want to increase the amount of jobs and employment, etc. But how are they doing that if they're going to cut 10,000 jobs? It's a little bit like the story about saying they need more funding for schools, but at the same time they're cutting funding for schools. And so those two just do not and cannot, as a matter of logic, work together. Now, obviously, in case you haven't heard, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, probably bad news, I suspect, in that Rachel Reeves is now expected to deliver a spring statement tomorrow alongside updated forecasts, we'll say, for the economy produced by the Office for Budget Responsibility, which has essentially said that growth is pretty much zero. And there's a question mark, huge question mark, over the headroom. That being how she plans to deal with the disappearance of her headroom since the budget, with the devastating effect on growth and much higher borrowing costs. We need to see what her plans are, what she's going to cut, what spending she's going to cut. There's already been uproar and turmoil over welfare and how that's going to affect so many people. But what else is she going to cut? And What other things might it be possible that she's going to raise taxes on? Because she's promised to avoid further tax rises, but I shall keep breathing in the meantime until I hear what actually is said in this so-called spring budget. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about in this video today is the Online Safety Act. Things that you can say online that could literally land you in prison. Now, we do have free speech, but there are certain things that absolutely you could be prosecuted by, and it's possibly a little bit worse than you might expect. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but first of all, something a bit more fun. Don't go away. Quick aside, if you have a sweet tooth, I have something really delicious for you, only it's even better because it's sugar-free. Because a company that sponsors my channel called Holy, who produce hydration drinks, energy drinks, and iced teas, which are full of vitamins and antioxidants, have partnered with a German sweet manufacturer called Hitchies and come up with amazing flavors for their new drinks, and they are absolutely amazing. My favorite is, as you can probably tell, the cola bottle variety. They also do a blue raspberry and an orange. So they haven't told me to do this, and I've decided to experiment myself, and I've put it with fizzy water because I thought if it works with water, maybe it will work with fizzy water. And actually it produces a very Coke candy-esque type drink, which is really, really nice. It's really tangy. It's fizzy, obviously. Now it's supposed to be with normal water. My favorite, I'll say this because it will make them laugh, and it will be a genuine recommendation from me, is the favorite has got to be the strawberry kiwi. I know I'll make them laugh by saying that because I say that almost every time. And as it happens, I have one with me here. Genuinely have one here. These are the bottles that you get with some of the orders. In fact, if you are a new customer, I suggest you go with the Starter Set Deluxe. You get a range of all the flavors, and you get a thermo shaker with it as well. So you can keep the drinks nice and ice and cold. They also do milkshakes. My favorite there was the hazelnut. I have an absolute weakness for anything that is hazelnut flavored, so their hazelnut milkshake was absolutely amazing. They've got strawberry, caramel, milkshake, banana, and hazelnut milkshakes. And as I say, I've got two favorites actually, the vanilla and the hazelnut. But they are all fantastic. The strawberry is an everyday favorite of everybody that I've shown it to. This is just amazing. If you liked Coca-Cola bottles, then you'll love this because, as I say, this is a very famous, if you're not familiar with it, in Germany at the very least and most of Europe, very famous sweet manufacturer. And so you'll love the cola drink if you like cola bottles. And my experiment seemed to have worked. Put it with some fizzy water and you get a fizzy cola drink, and that's just really nice. I've tried it with the normal water as well, but that's perfectly fine. And obviously, as a partner to my channel, you get a discount here. If you use the code Barrister5, you'll get a straightforward £5 discount off your order. But if you just use the code Barrister, you'll get a 10% discount, so that will work better for larger orders or ongoing orders. You'll find yourself a new favorite as an alternative to other, let's just call them other dark fizzy drinks that you might want to cut out. Fizzy water is obviously perfectly healthy for you. Water is obviously perfectly healthy for you. These are full of vitamins and antioxidants. And so I genuinely carry one of these around with me all the time because I like to drink lots of water. So give them a try. The links and the codes are in the description below. Have a field day. Try different ones. You will love them, I promise you. So thank you to Holy for sponsoring this video. Make sure you check them out. So back to free speech and the lack of, in some respects, with the Online Safety Act. What is it? What does it do? And why am I concerned about it? But first of all, a very quick shout out to the Stark Naked Brief on X, who did a post about this morning, which has sort of prompted me to talk about it again because I think this is something that a lot of people just won't realize. And so I'll link below. But the Online Safety Act, what is it? What does it do? Well, there's essentially two sides to this. On the one hand, it is designed to protect children and adults, for that matter, online, placing a duty on social media companies to search all of their services, things that are posted, things that are uploaded, for things that might be harmful, report them if necessary, responsible for users' safety, reporting users if they are putting other people at risk, taking down illegal content, and so on. And on the one hand, you might think, well, should they really be policing this content? Well, if they are providing the platform, then there's one argument to say that they should have a responsibility for doing that. And so that is the one side of it. I'm not diving too much into that in this video. The bit that I will dive into in this video are two separate offenses here. If I move them so it appears a little bit better on screen, that is fake news. That's not my video being fake news. Fake news is an offense, depending on who says it. Ironically, not the news companies, but more about that in a minute. You might find that a bit bizarre, but there we go. Fake news and another offense which might be a threatening communication. Now, bear with me. These require a little bit of explanation, but you might be quite alarmed by these because these are now laws and offences that you could be prosecuted for. So the fake news one first. I kid you not, fake news is now an offence. So Section 179 of the Online Safety Act. A person commits an offence if the person sends a message, which is pretty much any way you can think of sending a message, including posting on social media. The message conveys information that the person knows to be false. Now, I'll pause there and say, how would anybody possibly know that this person knows the information to be false? But there's a very important snippet of information as to why that is critical in this particular offence, and I'll come back to that in a minute, which is why it's worse than you thought. Then, at the time of sending it, the person intended the message or the information in it to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm. I don't know how a message can cause physical harm, but physical harm to a likely audience, and the person's got no reasonable excuse for sending it. And a likely audience just means anyone that might see it when you send it or post it or whatever. Is anyone that's reasonably foreseeable that would encounter the message in the online context or whatever. So, why is it important that we decide whether or not this person knows it to be false? Well, how would anyone decide? How would anyone know? And you may think, well, a jury of my peers will be able to decide that it's just possible that I didn't know it was false. But that's the problem here, because if you look further down, this will be interesting to law students or wannabe law students. If we want to decide now, the way that English law is written is a little bit frustrating sometimes, in that it doesn't always expressly say this is a summary-only offence or this is an indictable offence, or an either way offence is one that could be tried summarily or on indictment in the Crown Court. What it does do, normally at least, is tell you that on summary conviction or sometimes on indictment, what the penalty is. And so that's how you know whether it's summary only, indictable, or either way, as in indictable only or either way. And in this case, it says on summary conviction in England and Wales, the punishment for this offence, fake news offence, is imprisonment for a term not exceeding the maximum for summary offences, or a fine, or both. And obviously, for Northern Ireland, it's slightly different. Now, this is, bearing in mind, this is, I say fake news, it is a little bit more than fake news in that it's got to be some sort of message that you convey. It conveys false information that you know to be false, and at the time of sending it, you intend the message or the information to cause non-trivial psychological or even physical harm to a likely audience. But again, how does one determine any of that? How does one determine that you knew it to be false? How does one determine that you knew or intended that the information or the message was going to cause somebody non-trivial and psychological harm? Now, the non-trivial psychological harm bit will be for somebody else to decide and prove. But as to these subjective elements, what did you think? What did you intend at the time? What did you know at the time? Who is going to decide that? Because if it wasn't obvious, this being a summary offence, it's not going to be a jury. This is going to be at the magistrate's court. So either a single district judge or a panel of magistrates are going to decide what you knew, whether you knew it was false, and what you intended when you sent that message. So this is essentially a form of speech crime. Now, if we were to take a really serious example of this, and somebody sent something really horrific and they intended to really rock somebody to the core and really psychologically harm that person, of course we can probably agree that that should be wrong, even though that cuts across free speech somewhat, remembering that Article 10 freedom of expression is a qualified right. It doesn't mean you can say anything you like. It means we generally will protect your right to free speech, but there are boundaries and limits, and if something is grossly offensive, or in this case a specific false communications offence, they will take action on it. But that's not the only one. Now we move down to, there's some exemptions I'll come back to in a minute, which is it's quite bizarre. But we come back to threatening communications. Now again, on the face of it, we can probably all agree that sending a threatening message to somebody is probably mostly something that we shouldn't condone. We shouldn't accept. We should stand against and stamp out. Free speech be damned. There's still a problem with this as well, but we'll come back to that. A person commits an offence if they send a message and they convey a threat of death or serious harm, and at the time of sending it, they intended the individual encountering the message to fear that the threat would be carried out. So it's a little bit more serious. Or they were reckless as to whether the individual encountering the message would fear that the threat be carried out. And serious harm means anything that amounts to grievous bodily harm. So that's really serious harm, not just a scratch and a scrape, or even, depending on the bone, broken bones, etc. It's got to be really serious harm, or other things which I won't read out on YouTube. Now, interestingly, in proceedings for an offence under this section relating to the threat of serious financial loss, it's a defence for the person to show that this threat was used to reinforce a reasonable demand. So this is the sort of thing that some people might otherwise think of as blackmail. If you don't pay me, I am going to take you to court, apply for CCJs and all of this sort of stuff, and it's going to ruin your credit report and all of that sort of stuff. So if it relates to the threat of serious financial loss, it would be a defence to show that that was just to reinforce what is usually a reasonable demand, i.e. I've done the work, you need to pay me. And that the person reasonably believed that the use of the threat was a proper means of reinforcing the demand. So that doesn't mean you can then say, if you don't pay me, I'll send the boys around or whatever, using the traditional term you understand, then that wouldn't be acceptable. And interestingly, if evidence is adduced that is sufficient to raise this issue with respect to it being a defence, the court must assume that this defence is satisfied, unless the prosecution proves beyond any reasonable doubt that that's not the case. So if you raise sufficient evidence that this was just to reinforce a demand and it was reasonable, then that's fine. And this one, in fact, is an either way offence, because remembering what we said about how the terms are listed here, on summary conviction, the punishment is imprisonment for a term not exceeding the general limit for the magistrate's court, or a fine or both. Slightly different wording for Northern Ireland. And on conviction on indictment, to imprison for a term not exceeding 5 years, or a fine or both. So if you send one of these threatening communications, and we can probably all agree that in many cases sending a threatening communication that is causing someone to fear serious threat of death or serious harm is wrong, this is nonetheless something to be aware of when you're typing away and you think you have complete free speech. You don't. It's not completely free. Freedom of expression, one thing, but when you're making threats, that obviously takes a whole new life of its own. Now, exemptions. I left this till last under the false communications, the fake news offence. Interesting exemption here, which you probably won't quite believe. A recognised news publisher cannot commit an offence under the fake news section of 179. Now, there's probably some really interesting reasons as to why that is, but we'll perhaps come back to that in another video. But interestingly enough, a recognised news publisher cannot commit an offence under this false communications or fake news offence. But also, anyone that holds a broadcasting licence cannot commit an offence under this section. Anyone that runs a cinema or multiplex cannot commit an offence. Anyone that provides an on-demand programme service cannot commit this offence. And also, which seems rather broad to me, the offence cannot be committed in connection with the showing of a film made for cinema to members of the public. So very generally, cinema to the members of the public. A query, does that count for YouTube? Because this is not quite a cinema, it's not a multiplex, it's just a platform. But where do you draw the line? So I thought you'd find that quite interesting, because these offences very much do curtail free speech. In some sense, they might be justified, but as with many things, a lot of it is open to interpretation, and if it's open to interpretation, then it's potentially open to abuse as well. Particularly with the summary-only offences that you don't get a jury. You only get either a district judge or magistrate or magistrates deciding this case and deciding your fate. And they will decide what you knew, what you intended, and therefore whether you're guilty of the offence or not. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section below. Remember to check out Holy, they are fantastic drinks. And as always, thank you for watching.